Hello, this is my Lois mask tutorial. This tutorial will show you how to felt, paint, and add accessories to a Therian mask. Here are all the materials you need: blank cat mask or one made out of cardboard, felt, scissors, a pencil, a paintbrush, paint, a hot glue gun with hot glue sticks, cardboard or foam to use to add adjustments, or instead of using paint, you can use markers. And optionally, you can add elastic, faux fur, mesh, or your own backing. And I also recommend putting paper towels down at first, so that way it doesn't get too messy. First, let's begin with adding adjustments to our mask. So first off, I'm going to go over eyes. I'm going to make one eye bigger and one eye smaller. You can also add more eyes or make one eye completely go away. Here's just a quick time lapse of me cutting and adding stuff to the eyes. You can also add foam to the eyes to make them smaller. Here's the first eye finished. It's larger and more round than the original. And here's the second eye finished, which is smaller than the original. You can see the back now where I added the foam and where I cut open one of the eyes. I usually like to trace over the eyes first, just so that way I know where the eyes are going. And when adding the little strip there, it's just a tiny strip of foam. Now that the eyes are done, next up I'm going to add ears. You can make ears smaller, folded, bigger, whatever you want. I personally made mine bigger by cutting foam. Some people use foam while others use cardboard. Either option is great, but I personally use foam because I find it easier to work with. So first off, you want to trace your original ear and then slowly add a longer curve along it. That way you can make the ear bigger. Once you have traced your original ear and then you have made the new one bigger, then you can start cutting it out. I'm just showing you my tracing process here. And now I cut it out and I just double check that it fits before I copy it. So now that I know it fits, next up what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it around and trace it again. This way I have the same ear just flipped for my other ear. Cut it out and glue it on. Now we have both ears on. And we can move on to our next step, which is felting. Here's our final show of our mask base before we felt it. Here's the back side where you can see all the foam I used. Felting can be used with fleece or felt, it doesn't really matter. So now we move on to felting. When I first begin with felting, I usually put my mask on top of a bigger piece of felt and then cut out as much of the felt as I need. This way I can have the correct size, not too little and not too much. Once I have the correct amount of fleece or felt, I then put it on top of my mask with hot glue. First, I layer on top of it to make sure the felt or fleece actually fits, and then I can begin gluing. I personally go from side to side. So first, I usually begin on the left side and make it my way over to the right, but you can choose either side or go up and down. When I first begin on the left side, I then put one small dab of hot glue and then slowly continue my way going forwards. As you use your felt or fleece to glue, make sure you're comfortable. Go from small amounts to bigger amounts as you get more comfortable using hot glue. So you can see here I add my hot glue on and then I add my felt on, so that way I can get started with my mask. You may get some small wrinkles in your mask, but they're not that big of a deal. You can always smooth them out or just leave them there for extra design. By the time you paint, those small little wrinkles and mistakes won't even be noticeable, so it doesn't even matter. And remember to never try to strive for perfection in masks, because that's literally impossible. And as you hot glue, make sure you're smoothing everything out correctly, and if you missed any places, don't be afraid to go back and add hot glue to them. Now you should have at least that one side of glued down. Say the hardest part of felting is probably making sure everything looks even. It's hard to make sure everything looks perfect. Then just keep going along your mask. You can keep going through the eyes and over. And don't be afraid to put hot glue around your eyes. That's meant to happen. And I'll explain how to cut the fleece or felt out later. You can continue going on with your left or right side until you get to around the middle part where the nose bridge is. The nose bridge is a little trickier because it can usually get very wrinkled around there. So my recommendation is to take things slowly, and when you get there, play it flat and just get used to what you want it to look like. And then here's a quick time lapse of me just gluing down that left side. Now that the left side is done, you can continue with the nose bridge. I recommend putting where you want it to smooth out and smoothing it out yourself so that way it looks good. Don't get upset if there's a wrinkle or two in there. That's perfectly normal when you first start out. Even I still get wrinkles all the time. So here you can see one of those wrinkles. You don't usually want those bigger wrinkles because they're hard to smooth out. The important thing to remember is just to keep smoothing things out. And now you can keep watching the video to see it or fast forward ahead a bit. But if you don't want to fast forward, I can talk to you about my eBay. My eBay is MyLoisMass. You can also find it in my channel description. I sell pre-mades, pre-felts, painted ones, felted ones, whatever you want. And one day I do want to start commissions, but I'm very busy right now, so I can't. Mass prices can range from $20 to about $45, plus shipping, and of course taxes. I unfortunately only ship in the US right now, but I one day hope to range my prices and shipping out worldwide. I'm currently selling 2 pre-felts, 1 Siamese cat, another multicolored cat, a clown cat, and a Hello Kitty mask. Okay, done with the ad. Now that we are done with our nose bridge, we can move on to the right side and just finish up gluing just how you did on the left side. Felting can be pretty on and off for a while when you first start, but I'm sure you got this. Here's what your final project of felting should look like for now. Try to smooth out any wrinkles and make sure everything looks even. If you missed any places, just remember to add hot glue to them. And now what we're going to do is cut around so we don't have all this excess felt. I recommend leaving a bit more room around where you felt, so that way when you glue down the sides, it's easier. And sometimes too little of that will make it harder to glue down. So now you should have a thinner border around your mask with the felt. And hopefully your nose bridge will be glued down by now. So now that you have that, you can start adding little slits in there. Basically, these slits are to make it easier to glue everything down, and you want to add these slits all around the border. These slits can be small, big, medium size. I usually go bigger to medium though. And then here's a quick time lapse of me cutting these. Now that you have all your slits down, it's time to start gluing them down. A quick dab of hot glue should work. I know I probably sound like your teachers in elementary school telling you one dab will work, but it's true. And reminder to always be careful with these. When gluing down, you usually have to use your fingers to push the felt up, and that puts you at risk of burning your hands. Burning your hands can be extremely dangerous, especially with the hotter hot glue guns. So reminder to put safety first. And if you accidentally get burned, go run your fingers under cold water and hopefully put a band-aid on if needed. Now that we've gone over safety procedures and how to do it, you can glue all of your sides down. This shouldn't take too long, hopefully. But here's another time lapse of how I glue them down. Just small dabs, smooth it out, make sure it's flat, and if any of them are sticking out a bit, just glue them down and cut them off a bit, so that way you can't even see the slits from the front of the mask. Now your mask should be fully covered, and if you'll notice, you'll see that the eyes are still covered, which is what I'll get to next. Basically, we have to cut open the eyes and glue them down, so that way you can actually see. When cutting the eyes, you can either use scissors or an X-Acto blade. I personally use an X-Acto blade, but scissors are usually better for most people. When using a scissor method, I usually first poke a hole in and then cut a bunch of tiny slits, kind of like how I did for the border of the mask. This way, it's easier to glue everything down. And once you have those slits done, you can move on to the next eye. When you have these eyes that you'll see are a lot slimmer, it's a lot harder to cut them, so that's why I usually use X-Acto blades. But you basically want to cut one long slit in it, halfway through in the kind of middle area. Once you have that down, you can glue down. Again, please be safe here. You might want to wait for your hot glue to cool down a bit before you start pressing them up, because it will or might burn you. So just add those tiny little dabs, and then you can press down to glue them off. Sorry the camera angle isn't so great here. It's hard to film with one hand, and with the other hand, try to be gluing everything down. Now, one of your eyes should hopefully be glued down, and then you can start on the other one. Again, for the slimmer ones, please be careful because you might get burnt. I usually add a very thin line of hot glue to them and then glue them down using my fingers and gluing them down from pushing on the outside. So hopefully now your entire mask should be finished, or at least the base. And next up, we're going to be able to move on to painting. So now that we have a Felton mask, we can get on to painting. Pick your colors of choice and put them on a plate or a paint palette. Some people also use markers or airbrushes, but I usually end up using a paintbrush, a sponge, and a paint palette. Now you can pick your colors and get to painting. I recommend first drawing out your design so you know what you want it to look like. So as this time lapse goes on, I'll talk to you about painting. First, I recommend doing your basic colors. For example, for me, it was white and brown. Then you can begin blending together, and then you can move on to the smaller details like the nose, any inside areas, little freckles. And you can also add mesh too if you want before painting, and then paint the eyes, but I don't usually paint my mesh. So again, once you're done with your base colors, you can begin on these smaller details. For example, I have noses and freckles and just small little eye-like details. I also recommend looking at reference photos just so you know what you're looking at. And when blending, some people use airbrushes. I usually use either just my finger or a sponge to blend. But blending can really bring your mask to life, and I definitely recommend it, even if you are just using your finger. So now as this comes to a close, we are going to be able to talk about our last final details, like adding fur and mesh. And if you don't want those little fuzzy things happening on them, I use Got2b glue, so that way it glues those down. So now we're just finishing off with our last details. For example, I use these sticks to add color to my mask and these small little markings and details. Kind of like oil pastels you can use. I also sometimes like to add little clay details. For example, I'm adding these little eyebrows on with clay. And now I'm adding faux fur. I personally start out with white and use the multicolored sticks to add color to them. I just kind of blend them on, and it takes a bit, but it eventually does work. Then I attach the two pieces with glue. I make sure to measure them out for how big or small I want them, so that way I know where everything goes. And then I just glue them on. And now the front of the mask base is finally finished. It honestly looks a lot better than I expected. Now it's time to work on the back, so first I'll add some eye mesh. If you want, you can paint yours, but I don't usually paint mine, or some people use markers. So now that we have the eye mesh in, there's only one more thing we have to work on, which is totally optional, but we can add lining to the back to make it comfier, and of course also elastic. I personally use this black Minky for my lining in the back. I cut out a big chunk, glue it in where it's needed, and then I cut the edges of it, and then I glue any of the final details down. The eyes are a little trickier to do, but I usually take an X-Acto blade and I lift up the fabric a little bit and I cut it out, and then I glue anything down that needs to be. So here's the finished mask. I ended up changing the eyebrow colors. Now all I need to add is elastic. I have this big roll of elastic and I measure about half of my head with the elastic and cut it out and add it into my mask. I glue both sides down, and then sometimes you can optionally add one going from the front of the mask to the middle of your original elastic, but that's only if you really want the mask to be extra stable. And here's the finished mask on me. I'm really proud of it, and I hope you enjoyed this mask tutorial. Have a great day. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment them in the comment section below.